Okay, we are recording. Today's webinar is Audit Team Communication, and it's Thursday, June 4th, 2020. This webinar is part of our series that we're doing on remote auditing to try to emphasize the differences and help people prepare for how you might approach remote auditing a little bit differently from doing a traditional on-site audit, whether it's an internal audit or a supplier audit. But one of the things that I've found from actually doing the remote audits is not everything is less. There are actually some advantages to doing remote audits that I hadn't anticipated. And I think if we really take a little bit of time to optimize the process for remote auditing, we might actually, in some cases, get a better result from remote auditing. And we might want to think about applying some of those lessons learned to the way we approach our internal audits and supplier audits that are on site and just do them a little bit differently because we might get a little bit better outcomes. So that's something that is part of my goal in this sort of an overarching goal of the series. But today's is going to be focusing on communication. And there are two types of communication. There's communication between the lead auditor and any team members. So if you only have one person as your audit team, that's communicating with you, yourself, and you. And then the other communication, which always exists, is the communication between the auditors and the auditee. And the more auditors you have, the more complicated, of course, everything gets, both with the auditee and group communication as well. But there are two different times when you're supposed to specifically explain to everybody involved in the audit, this is how we're going to do communication. One of those times is during the opening meeting. You're supposed to say what the formal communication channels are between yourself, the audit team, and the auditee. The second thing you're supposed to say in the opening meeting is how you're going to keep the auditee informed of the progress of the audit. Are we ahead of schedule? Are we behind schedule? Are we going to be able to complete the scope? And do we have any nonconformities? Which gets us into the second thing that is a communication requirement. During the audit, the team members need to notify the lead auditor of any potential nonconformities because it's the lead auditor that decides whether it is a nonconformity or not. Because not everything is a nonconformity. Some things are, maybe this needs to be clarified, or maybe we don't have all the answers. Maybe we are talking to the wrong person. We're not looking at the right record. Just because one person can't find it doesn't mean it's non-existent. It might just be we're talking to the wrong person, or they can't find the record yet. So that happens a lot, and auditors sometimes make the mistake of jumping to a conclusion that this is a nonconformity because it doesn't spontaneously fly into their hands. And then another part of this is requesting for documents and records. As you audit, you're going to request documents and records, and they might not all be readily available in front of you. They might be archived. So as soon as we have something that's more than a few months old, typically things get filed away in document and record locations. And so somebody has to retrieve those, make a copy for the auditor, make a copy for whoever the subject matter expert is that they're interviewing. And usually in a perfect world, we request those and they're waiting for us on the table back in the conference room when we get there. Another communication that happens during the audit is audit trails. If you are doing the audit by yourself, you're the lead auditor and you don't have an audit team, this is really just a note to yourself. When I get to that area, I need to go look at this. But if you have a team of audits, a team of auditors, you might not be actually doing that part of the audit. So for instance, if you're doing incoming inspection and somebody's using a caliper and somebody else is responsible for doing calibration, you want to record the calibration ID number and give that as an option for that auditor that is covering calibration to sample the records of calibration of that caliper. And so you might give them names of people to look at training records. You might give them calibration records. You might give them a validation study that you want them to go look up. But just because you identified it as a potential record to go look at doesn't mean they will. If you have a team of 2 or 3 auditors, if each person grabs a record, gives you several names of people to sample for training and several records to sample for calibration ID, eventually you have a very long list and you can't sample all of them, so you pick a subset of that. So sometimes it's making a note for yourself to look up that later, and sometimes it's a note for your other team members to please look that up when they cover that area. The next thing is any delays. So oftentimes time is the biggest concern for all auditors, particularly the inexperienced auditors, or when anything goes awry in your conducting of the audit and it doesn't go smoothly. In these cases, we have delays, and so we have to adjust our schedule or sample less or speed things up. There's a lot of things we can do to adjust, but we need to notify the team members, particularly the lead auditor, hey, I have a delay. And notify the auditee as well, because, hey, we're supposed to be there in 20 minutes, but we're not going to make it. We're going to be about 10, 15 minutes late. Let the person know. If you're running ahead of schedule, that does happen occasionally. For instance, you put something on the schedule and turns out they no longer do that, so it's not applicable. Or we decided everything looked very, very well controlled and it hadn't changed a lot since the last time you audited that area. So you might be a little bit ahead of schedule. In those cases, it's good to let people know, hey, we're coming early, be prepared. Or I have a little bit of time on my schedule. Is there something I can help another auditor with if you're on a team? That's a really important point when you get into team audits, which a lot of individual consultants don't do, but you tend to do when you're working for a notified body in certification audits. The recertifications and the initial certifications often require more than one auditor for a big company. And in those situations, as a lead auditor, often what I would do personally is I would assign my best auditor to the easiest processes. And the reason why is I would tell them right up front, I'm giving you less work than will keep you busy, with the intent of having you pick up the slack wherever somebody falls behind. But because I don't know where we're going to fall behind in advance, I'm going to push the other people on the team as far as they can go because they're the less experienced auditors. And I'm going to expect you to be finished early so you can jump in and help them wherever they need it. And if they don't need help, that's great. You can help me with the report. But if everything goes how I expect it, they'll fall a little bit behind because I'm pushing them to their limit, and you can come in and rescue them. And that's how we help we do it. We reach gradient stress levels. So initially you push somebody a little bit, but when you do that approach, you're actually pushing a new auditor to their very limit of strain just before where the point where they can't handle it. But you have a support team for them. You say, look, let us know when you fall behind. Let us know what you're not able to do. And we have another auditor that can jump in and help you. So don't panic. And so that's how I manage teams. I usually assign the hard jobs to the least experienced auditors and the easy jobs to the most experienced auditors with the intent of them being able to pitch in. And that just makes everybody better. So it's just my style of managing things. Other people take the opposite approach. It's not wrong. It's just different. So those are just some general approaches to communication, and they apply to all audits, whether it's a remote audit or it's an on-site audit. Here are some limitations to on-site audits. And a lot of people don't think of, oh, on-site audit, I don't think about it on any limitations to this because this is what I always do. Well, if you think about it, one of the things is that we rely often on nonverbal communication to tell us whether somebody is giving us accurate information, to verify, yes, this makes sense because the person looks very confident. We rely on that nonverbal communication, and sometimes we make the mistake of not verifying that I understand what they're saying. Sometimes we think we understand, we don't. And other times we just don't take this time to verify that what they're saying is correct. They'll assume that they know the answer and they may actually be doing it differently than that person thinks. So that's an important thing to remember is being face-to-face with somebody. Sometimes that person is very talented and skilled at telling us what we want to hear. And we tend to rely on that feedback of the nonverbal communication, and that's not always a good thing. Another thing that's specific to team audits is when you want to have a conversation with team members, it's a little awkward to have discussions about whether something is a nonconformity, is not a nonconformity. You want to have a fairly candid and open conversation with your team members, and you don't want the auditee listening in because they're going to try to persuade you that it's not a nonconformity. So you end up whispering and having private meetings, and that's not always easy to orchestrate. So that's another limitation of being on site. We also have lack of computer access sometimes when we're walking around. A lot of times auditors that are doing on-site audits, they'll have a pad of paper and they'll be writing on the pad of paper. Some of us will have tablets, but the tablets are a little more heavy and not always reliable. So we tend to rely on the old standby of a piece of paper and a pen because it can't break. It can't let us down. But the downside of that is we're going to have to retype all that information later, and we can only write it about 30 words a minute, whereas a skilled typist can type it over 100 words a minute. Even on a bad day, I do 60, and that might be one-handed. So you got to think about what is the best tool for taking notes during an audit, and walking around with a piece of paper and a pen is how we end up doing it a lot, and it's not always the best way. It's slow. And if you have poor handwriting like mine, you can't read your notes afterwards. And we make mistakes writing things down. So I see a lot of typos in audit reports that were transcribed handwritten notes. Another thing is most commercial buildings are steel buildings for safety reasons, for fire. The insurance adjusters want to see a steel building for integrity of that building, and they'll often have cement and reinforcement. Well, the more metal you put in a building, the more you build a Faraday cage that is impervious to cellular communication. So we would like to think, I'm in Chicago and I'm going to have a great cellular connection, or I'm in Cleveland and I'll have a great cellular connection. And you walk inside the building and now you're in a cone of silence. So that is a limitation of on-site audits. You only find out after you get there that you can't send a simple text message to somebody on the other side of the building, even though you're half a mile from a major tower. So that's something to worry about. On-site audits rarely have breaks too. Oftentimes, particularly with supplier audits, we try to shove the whole thing into an 8-hour day. Whatever the time their day starts, their workday, let's say it's 8:30, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., that's what we try to squeeze an audit into, and that gives us no breaks. We might have a lunch break, but other than a lunch break, it's constant go, 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 go. That's exhausting. And so rather than continuous audits, particularly multi-day continuous audits that grind you down after flying there and flying back, it's nice to have a break. So that's something you can't do often when you're doing on-site audits, is take a break, particularly if you're doing a full quality system audit as a consultant. And then last but not least, the follow-up at the end of the audit is typically at the end of the audit. It could be real time. So I could be in the incoming receiving inspection area. I could identify a caliper that needs to have verification that it was calibrated and have somebody look at those records. If I know right at this time somebody's looking at calibration as a process, I could text that person, I could email that person, hey, here's a new calibration ID right now, instead of waiting till the end of the audit and having a time carved out for an hour or two of just doing follow-up of trails that I didn't get to when I was in that area. And that's inefficient. To go back to that area, bring in the subject matter expert and look at records. You end up doing a whole bunch of looking at records at the end of the audit, and you can't ask a lot of questions always because you can't have an army of subject matter experts in the room. So you rely on the record itself speaking to you rather than the auditee being able to explain it. So those are some of the limitations of an on-site audit that a lot of people don't think about. They think on-site audits are the best of the best, but there are limitations. So if you want to conduct an audit and be successful, particularly a remote audit, you need to think of identifying tools and methods that are going to enhance your abilities as an auditor. So if I'm going to be doing a remote audit, I want to think of how can I improve what I hear from the person, what can I do to improve what I see, and what can I do to improve to help my memory of what the person said. And a lot of people don't think about this proactively. This is part of your audit preparation. When you're planning an audit as a lead auditor, how am I going to make sure I can hear what's going on? How will the auditees make sure they can hear what's going on if I'm conducting a remote audit? Well, number one, you should get a headset. That's number one on the list. Keep your hands free so you can type, and have a headset so the distance from your mouth to the microphone is consistent throughout the entire audit, and outside ambient noise, such as the lawnmower or the FedEx guy, doesn't disturb you. And if you have kids, you might want to think about letting everybody know, first of all, hey, I've got kids in the house today. I'm working from home. We're doing this audit. That is going to be an interruption. There's nothing I can do about it. You don't yell at your kids. They're being kids. But at the same time, you you need to anticipate, where in the house could I do this where I would get the least interruptions, and maybe I can put something on the door to remind my children before they knock on the door that if it's not important, don't knock. Next thing on the list is seeing. Make sure you have a video camera. I'm not using a video camera right now on this. Sometimes people have commented to me that when I have the live video during a webinar, it's somewhat distracting. But when you're doing an audit, you want to actually see the other person and see what they have to show you. You're interviewing them, so you've got to pretend you're actually there. They're not doing a PowerPoint for you. You're not just doing a desktop audit of a record. You're doing an interview of a subject matter expert in doing a process approach audit, and therefore you need to be able to see them and see what they're showing you, and maybe even they're going to walk you around the facility and give you a tour and show you something in action, demonstrating something. So you need to be able to see. Get yourself a high definition camera. Make sure they have a high definition camera. Make sure they have more than one tool that they can use. So one at their desk if they're talking to you at the office. And then if you say, now let's go out on the production floor, they have a camera that's mobile that can do that. And they might even have a separate camera person to help with that. So a separate, completely separate line that frees up their cell phone to use for a cell phone or to text messages, but another dedicated cell phone just for the video part. And then the memory part, when I am doing an audit on site, I'm always trying to furiously write down notes. And I've learned over time, if I can ask for a list of documents, then at least I know if they give me a list of a master document list, I'll have all the procedures and all the revisions correct. And I won't misspell anything. I can copy and paste from that list. But when you're doing a remote audit, you could ask them to send that to you, but you can also snap a picture. I have my cell phone, they're doing a video. Hey, hold that steady for a second. I'm going to snap a picture. Or if you're recording it with video, you can go back to the recording and pause it and review it. And that makes you have perfect memory. You can listen to it as many times as you want. You can go back and review it. So when you record things and you snap pictures, it stores that information. You can incorporate it into the report as well as a picture. It makes it into a multimedia presentation for your report, and it gives everybody a lot more confidence that the information is 100% accurate. So our brain, our eyes, and our ears can be enhanced dramatically. No, we can't touch and we can't smell, but we can use our other three senses and improve those. Okay, so the next thing here is identifying tools and methods that are going to make us more efficient. Efficiency falls into two categories. Number one is related to an audit team. When we're doing things as an audit team, we want to all be working together, not against one another. So you want to plan, if there's an area that's going to get me a bunch of records for training and a bunch of records for calibration, I want to do that in sequence before I do the other area. So there's a sequence to that, but I need to communicate that with the other team members. I want everybody pulling together. I don't want them pulling each other in opposite directions. I don't want them fighting with one another. I want them helping and communicating. So getting your team to work together is part of being more efficient, but also the sequence and the order is important as well. So the image on the right there, that's just a map of, if you were going to go sightseeing in London, you could go back and forth between the east side of London and the west side of London, back and forth and waste a bunch of time in transit. But if you plan your route out in advance, you could go in a somewhat linear fashion from west to east or east to west and minimize your travel time. And so that might be a really good way to approach an audit as well. Think about, what is the logical sequence? What information do I need in before I go to this area? Before I go to purchasing, what information am I going to need from other processes so I can do a good job of purchasing? So what is the logical sequence of events? When I do on-site audits, I often think about different things like, oh, that's going to be after lunch and I might be really tired, so let's pick something where I'm walking around. But when you're doing remote audits, you don't have to do everything continuously in an 8-hour day. It can be semi-continuous, and I may not have the issue of walking around being an issue. So I might I might do them so they make more sense in terms of I need this information from this process before I go into the next process. So the sequential order is of processes that you're going to audit is important, and so think about that when you're planning your audit. Another thing I talked about was handwriting of notes. We live in a very digital age now, and we have all kinds of really cool tools. Um, I'm sure a lot of people out there have used Samsung phones that have a stylus. I have one. They're the Note series of Samsung phones. They also have all kinds of tablets. All the iPads have these detachable pens that you can use. There's a new product out there called Remarkable that is much better on battery and is much better at handwriting recognition that you might consider using. That's why I show that, because it's new and different out there. I'm still waiting for mine to arrive, so that's an issue. But it's a tool that you might consider. But I also have done this with tablets from both iPads as well as used Samsung tablets. So I've used both, and I have the pens for them, and then I've done it on my cell phone as well. And so those are all tools that you can use. But if you are going to handwrite it on a piece of paper and then transcribe it, the downside of that is you're doing something twice, and that's not very efficient. If you have a tablet that has the ability to snap a picture and then you can annotate that picture, that's a perfect world. So those are some things that you might think about when you're whether you're on site or whether you're off site doing a remote audit. These virtual audits, I might be controlling all the Zoom communications or GoToMeeting communications through my PC or laptop, and then I need something else to write on, or I'm completely switching screens all the time. But I don't want to do it manually on a piece of paper and then transcribe, because that's going old school. I want to stay using current technology and keep everything digital. So I might use a tablet. Another tool that I use instead, I think, is on our next slide here. Yep. So this is my setup. I actually have a Pixel book. So you can see my server, our mini server on the left-hand side there. It's like the equivalent of an Apache. And then I have this gigantic 48-inch flat screen monitor that's obscenely large and too big actually for ergonomics. And then I have this little tiny Pixel book that sits in front of me that I do all my typing and my notes on for the audit. So I have this great big screen to see things on, and I can put two things side by side, and I can do split screens on the big flat screen. But then to type my audit report, I have this little tiny Pixel book that's lightning fast. And I do everything in Google Docs. So I never have any delays on that, and it can even function offline. But the beauty of having it online is if I'm doing a team audit, I can have two people working on the report at the same time, and we can both write notes to one another right in the report. So no writing things on a piece of paper and transcribing, and no tablets. We go right to the Pixel book, and it's a faster solution. Um, Not everybody can afford this setup, but when you are a full-time auditor running a company, this is what you do. And success key number 4. Um, Everybody gets stressed, but when you are doing one thing people don't think about is when you're doing a remote audit, you're all by yourself. When you're doing an audit on site, there are other people there that if you don't know the answer, you can rely on them to answer the question. You can say, I don't know that answer. Could you help with this answer? Sometimes you can non-verbally kind of tell them that. Sometimes you can outright say, hey, could you answer that for me? You can say you don't know and somebody else is on the phone. But when you're doing a remote audit, you may not be able to do that because you might be the only one on the call and you're all by yourself in your office or at home. And that might give you anxiety of being somewhat isolated. And so that actually increases the anxiety of people when they do remote audits. So you need to make an effort as an auditor to put the person at ease and make that part of your approach. So one of the things I like to do is be very casual. I don't wear the navy blue suit anyway, ever. So I'm certainly not going to dress up for a remote audit. Um, if I just came in from a run or a workout, that's how I'm going to be dressed, and I don't expect them to be, they don't have to smell my workout. They can, but I'm not going to dress up for it either. And so one of the things that I try to do is be well caffeinated and smiling and tell some jokes and put the person at in a relaxed mode. But I am sure this image that I'm showing here is how a lot of people are feeling when they're doing an audit. And this is so much better for me personally because I'm 6'6" and over 300 pounds. So when I walk up to a 4'11", a Filipino woman that's working on a production line, she looks like this bear, or she's actually underground, hiding. So people really get anxious when I come to audit. And I found one of the tricks on-site auditing is to sit down next to them so I'm not as tall, particularly if I'm going to have somebody sitting down demonstrating something to me. I'm not going to hover over them. I sit next to them and I ask them if it's okay, and I try to put them at ease before I start asking them a barrage of questions. And I pause in between them, and I try to be complimentary and do lots of things to put them at ease. So that's something you really need to pay attention to. There's isolation anxiety caused by remote auditing, and it's not something you might be familiar with if you've only done on-site audits. Next tool, improving accuracy. So we all have probably played the telephone game. You tell one person, and then they tell another person, and then they tell another person, and 3, 4 people down the line. What you told the first person is not what the last person in line is ever hearing. It's always completely different, and sometimes radically altered to the point where it makes kids giggle. Well, same thing happens in auditing. So we need to try to improve our accuracy of the information that's being communicated to us. And one of the ways to do that is ask the person to write it down for you. Ask the person to snap a picture and send it to you. If the screen, if they're trying to hold up a piece of paper in front of a video camera and it's moving all over the place, or you're trying to hear them and it's too noisy, just ask them to write it down. Somebody has a computer, somebody has a cell phone, somebody can write this down for you, or they can do it remotely. But just make a note, they're going to get me back, they're going to get me this information. And then when you're in a better place at a different time during the audit, maybe a half hour later, you follow up and get that information accurately. So think about how you can get people to transfer information to you. Because they have a computer and you have a computer, there is no reason why they can't just email it to you or put it in the chat box or snap a picture for you and text it to you. There's so many digital ways to communicate that information. Do not slip into the fact of, oh, this is the way I've always done it. I write it down. Writing things down is not always the most accurate way. Just have them snap a picture. Another thing that will really make your audits go smoothly, this is something I didn't anticipate when I was planning remote audits, but I have found it to be absolutely true. My energy level goes sky high during remote audits relative to on-site audits because I can take a break. I can put my feet up. I can go for a walk out to the mailbox. I can go up and get a fresh cup of coffee and take a break. Sometimes during on-site audits, I've done that on purpose. Like, I don't really need to go to the bathroom, but I'm getting tired of this, so I just want to take a break. So I go to the bathroom, or I go get a drink, or I go grab a cup of coffee, or I stand up and walk around the room reading a document twice when once would have been enough. I might spend a little more time on a document just so I can get a walk around the room a little bit. I've done little tricks like that during an audit just to give myself some personal rest, some to recharge my energy, to not be stuck in that same position. So put your feet up, get outside, get a fresh bit of air. Um, you know, do something. Go next door and grab a cup of coffee at Starbucks if you got one nearby. Maybe not during COVID-19, but go outside at least to the mailbox and get outside a little bit, see some sun, and that will definitely help your energy level. And because we can't see what the person's wearing on their feet, if sandals make you happy, wear your sandals. Another thing that goes sort of hand in hand with that taking breaks is it's been proven scientifically that you will be more productive if you have intense periods of work followed by breaks. And the maximum length of time that somebody can realistically stay active and concentrate on a task is about 90 minutes. So there's this Pomodoro technique in the classic Pomodoro exercise is 25 minutes on work, 5 minutes off work. Repeat that 4 times. So that's 2 hours of work total with 4 segments of 25 and 4 5-minute breaks. And then you take a little longer break before you get into the next 2.5-hour segment. So that's basically the Pomodoro technique in a nutshell. But most audit processes we look at are a little bit more intense and require a little bit more time than 25 minutes. And to stop the audit every 25 minutes might be disruptive. So in general, what I try to do is schedule something that's a little longer. I think the optimum is either 45-minute for a short process or 90 minutes for a long process. So if it's a major process that I'm going to audit, like design controls, I'd probably spend 90 minutes. And if it's a short process like document control, I'd probably spend 45 minutes. If I even dedicate a section to document control, I might just sample document control throughout all their processes as part of the process approach. So using the Pomodoro technique and playing around with the intervals of dedicated work and then providing breaks in between can actually dramatically increase your productivity and your energy level. So it's another thing to help you improve your focus as an auditor. And I think also it helps the auditee when they don't have to focus for hours and hours on end, particularly this subject matter expert that might be on multiple subjects in a row, or um, the management representative for the company. Those people, they get tired, just like you get tired. So as a remote audit, schedule some breaks. Matthew Walker and I, we've scheduled an hour-and-a-half session in the morning, an hour-and-a-half session in the afternoon. We've got another audit with another client coming up where we're going to do 2 sessions, an early morning session, one right before lunch, and then one in the afternoon. So we've done 3 a day and 2 a day, all of them of 90 minutes. Those seem to be working really, really well because you get a nice break in between, answer emails, go get a cup of coffee, take a walk, come back to it, and you're ready to go again. And the auditee can do the same thing. And if they have some things that they need to go get for the auditor, this gives them a chance to go get that information or do other things that are their job. It also should be a little bit easier for a supplier that's being audited to support that kind of format because they don't have to shut down their business for the day to support your audit. They only need to give you 90 minutes of time. And then they can go back to work and then do another 90 minutes of time. Or if they can only give you one session a day, do a 90-minute session either in the morning or the afternoon and spread it out over more days. But there's no reason why we have to do it all continuously, 8 hours on Monday and 8 hours on Tuesday, or 8 hours on Monday only to get the audit done. We can spread it out because we're not getting on a plane. We're not paying for multiple nights in a hotel anymore. It's not necessary to do it all the way a notified body does it normally when they're on site. And I got a little comment in the chat. So this is a great time for, okay. So those breaks also let me get the answer to those questions I don't know for sure off the top of my head. Excellent point, Matthew. That's right. Same thing when I was doing on-site audits. If I didn't know an answer, I would wait till I would go back to the conference room, usually at lunchtime, and I'd look up a guidance document or I'd look up a standard that I didn't have carried with me. And now when you have these breaks, you can go look that information up. This is also a great time to have your audit team discussions. So instead of scheduling, this is when we're going to have a formal audit meeting like you do on an on-site audit, or say, I need to converse with the lead auditor for a moment. Can I do that? Where are they? Let's go find them. That's a little bit disruptive, but when you do this hour-and-a-half in the morning, hour and a half in the afternoon, you can have a lunch where you're both eating a sandwich. They're at one place, you're at another place, and you can talk on the phone about how things went in the morning, answer their questions, and prepare for the afternoon in a much more relaxed way. And you're both sitting there having lunch, not even necessarily in the same building. So that's definitely a good way, a good advantage of having these breaks rather than having a big continuous 8-hour day. So take advantage of that. Don't try to do everything like you always do it. Next slide. Okay, so those were the 7 different things that I came up with that are some keys that may help you improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your remote audits. Another thing you really need to focus on is what is going to be your tool that you use for communication between your team. So email is an obvious thing we can all use. Text is another one, whether you use Messenger or use some other text function on your phone, doesn't matter, but texting is an option. Matthew and I have been doing a lot of Google Docs. All of our employees in our company use Google Docs to communicate with proposals and invoices. But because a lot of the documents we produce for the FDA are Word documents or PDFs, we tend to do both systems. We'll have some things in Google Docs and some things in Word. But I think for audit reports, when you're doing a multiple person team audit, it's really nice to be able to both type in the same document at the same time, see that the other person's in there and working on and where they're working on at this time, and not having conflicting documents, which is what you would have if you had a Word document that was shared in Dropbox. You can only one person check it out at a time, and they can't simultaneously write on the same document. And so I think Google Docs is a much preferred way of typing up my audit report. And then if you want to export that to Word, you can, or you can just PDF it directly from Google Docs, which is what we often do. So Google Docs, we actually have a template for an audit report, and that's actually what you saw on that screen back there where I was on the Pixel book. So highly recommend that is your tool for writing your audit reports is Google Docs. And then I show a picture here of Slack. So this is the Slack app. It's showing you 3 different pages. This one here shows you some of the options on the right-hand side. The center is showing a discussion, sort of a networking thread where you're going back and forth with messages in Slack. So in that way, it's a lot like text messenger or Facebook messenger. And then on the left-hand side, it tells you what messages are waiting from you, or for you. So you could very easily have separate groups that you create within Slack, and you could have them specific to an audit. So you could have a group that's just your audit team. So all the messages from all the auditors go into the same message location, and they can see if there's a message waiting for them. So that's a really powerful tool that's right on your phone that you could use. You can also attach documents. So if you see at the bottom of the middle image, it has building policies and procedures. That's a post that somebody put there, but that could very easily be a Google Doc as well. You could have a chain, like people are running ahead of schedule or behind schedule. You could have an update on somebody's calendar for a meeting time. You also have the ability to snap pictures and share those with a group and have people vote on things, even like thumbs up, thumbs down. They have all kinds of functionality you can add to Slack with a app called Zapier as well that allows integration. Ah, so Matthew makes another comment here. He says, "Yes, I've asked Rob on more than one occasion by writing it into the audit report on Google Docs we're both working on, and he likes to highlight it." So that's another important point. Like you might be 2 different auditors. You might use different font colors. So I might do everything in blue, and he might do everything in purple or red or black. By using 2 different colors, we know who wrote what, and then we could say things that I've highlighted in yellow or things that I've highlighted in red are things I need you to respond to. So those are sort of highlight, hey, this is something for somebody to pay attention to. So I think that's really helpful. Thank you, Matthew. Going on to the next slide here. So don't allow multitasking. So this is my own personal pet peeve. People think that they're being more efficient because they're doing more than one thing at once. And in reality, they don't actually finish the task faster because just like a computer, your brain can only do one thing at a time. It appears to be doing 2 things at once, but it's going back and forth between the 2 tasks, or you're doing one of those tasks subconsciously. You're not actually focusing on that task. So if it's to the level of competence where you can do it subconsciously, like walking and chewing gum, that's fine. But if you're conducting an audit and you're the auditee, if you're going to try to operate your Zoom meeting and get whatever you're trying to show somebody on a virtual tour centered in the screen so they can see it, and try to answer all the questions from the auditor at the same time, that's not going to work. This person's going to either not be focusing the camera on the right location, or another problem is sometimes they're using the front-facing camera, which has lower resolution in some phones, or they just they get distracted and they're suddenly pointing in a completely wrong direction and simultaneously trying to answer a question. So one of the things I recommend is have somebody as a dedicated camera person whenever you go out of the office. When it's not sitting in front of a computer with a dedicated webcam and you go mobile and you go throughout a facility, that's when you should think about having a dedicated camera person. And you might want to spill for that person having a smartphone gimbal, which is what is shown here. I actually have that model. Um, or you could have a selfie stick. And the nice thing about the gimbal is it keeps it steady, so it's always horizontal, so you don't have people getting dizzy and sick. Um, and and you can more easily follow somebody that's moving and keep them upright. But at the same time, you can also use a selfie stick where you can get above everybody and sort of over a crowd. So you sort of get somewhat of a bird's eye view. Another thing that you could potentially do is use drones. So when you have a big production area and you have high ceilings, you can actually use drones. And they've actually done that in some audits, particularly internationally. They'll actually have this little tiny drone and they'll have it go up above the production workers and they'll go up and down the production line so you can see who's working in the facility. So a lot of companies have done that to see what, is Apple really doing what they're saying they're doing in their facilities, or is it a sweatshop with a bunch of children working? Well, let's go see. And you have a little drone fly around the facility and see what they're doing. So that is an option to have drones, to have selfie sticks, to have gimbals. These are these are tools that our kids like to play with, but they actually are useful for doing these audits as well when you're doing things remotely. We also have some limitations. So not everything is rosy in the world of remote audits, and we do have some limitations. And the number one thing that everybody needs to think about most is security. Zoom has had Zoom bombing occur to their meetings, so you want to lock out the meeting so you only have the people that are invited. That's number one. But there are other kinds of things that people can do to hack into things, whether you're using Zoom or Google Meeting or whatever the system is. It is not it's never going to be impervious to hacking. Somebody can get into that signal. Another thing that can happen is when people have the ability to record things, you're showing it on a screen, even though it may not be saying they're recording it, people have the ability to set up a little tripod and set up their camera and film everything that's being done. And they might even be putting it on speaker so they can record the sound as well. So that's something to think about is, people have the ability to record things they said they're not going to. There has to be a certain level of trust, but that is a concern that people have. And if you're working for a company or working with a company that has top security clearance is required, for instance, I went in and did an audit of a facility that did ceramics for the military. That's not a place you could bring a phone into the building. Um, and we actually had to do some pictures of that facility and do some video of that for a Office of Naval Research grant. So in that particular case, people at the facility had to take the video for me. So that's definitely a concern. We're limited to nonverbal, or limited in the ability for us to use nonverbal communication. We can't really do a lot of talking. We can't do a lot of seeing what the other person is saying other than what they show us on the screen. So things that are off screen or things that are hidden, they might not be as obvious um, to people when you have these, when you're doing the audit. You might not be sure that this person is comfortable. You might not be able to see the nervousness in them when you're doing things remotely like you can when you're face to face. So we have a little less nonverbal feedback from a person. We can see their face, but we can't necessarily see all of their body. And so certain things you don't notice, like their foot tapping more actively than it was before. We just got a little chat notice. John was mentioning that it's great to have non-disclosure agreements in place. Yes, so certainly that's one way of addressing the security concerns. And both during on-site audits and remote audits, we still have the NDAs in place. Most companies should be doing that, but that's pretty routine. Participants feel isolated when they're. I had talked about this before. Particularly the auditees, they feel like they don't have anybody there to help them because they're on screen by themselves. So sometimes it's nice to have multiple people on those meetings and have a panel, like here's the video display of 3 or 4 different people that are all in the conversation. Maybe one of them's an observer, but knowing the other person's there so you can refer the question that you don't know the answer to them is really a great way to do things. But sometimes when you don't have those people there, that causes a problem. If you have delays, we always have delays in audits. We ask for a record, they got to go get the record. But now they not only have to go get the record, but they have to actually scan the record and show it to us, or they have to put it on a stand and hold it a certain distance from the webcam for us to be able to see it. So that increases the delays that we normally see with retrieving records and documents. At the same time, I see that almost is balanced out 100% by being able to get access to electronic versions of documents by just email it to me. So I find, yes, some things are magnified slower, but that seems to get canceled out quite a bit by people being able to email me electronic versions of things too. Um, Preparation. Some people are just not really good at preparing ahead of time. They think that audit preparation is an hour-long activity or a half-hour-long activity instead of reviewing the audit preparation documents thoroughly in advance. When you do remote audits, you need to be more prepared. You also need to prepare your auditee for what they need to have ready to support a remote audit. So make sure they know they need to have a separate camera person, make sure that they have multiple devices that they can use, a webcam, make sure that they have a flexible connection to it, make sure that they have a selfie stick, these different tools that they have, make sure you have headsets with microphones. These are all things that you might want to mention to them in advance before you're actually conducting the audit, because during the audit, you could spend 15, 20 minutes them hunting around for the tool to make it easier to do the audit. So that's something you want to worry about. Fear of change. This is different. They're used to always doing it this way, on-site auditing. Now we're asking them to do everything remotely. There's a fear of that change just because it's different. And there's a fear of technology. In general, a lot of the subject matter experts you're going to be going and speaking with are not the youngest people in the facility. They're the more senior people in the facility. And sometimes that equals somebody in their 50s or 60s. So when you have somebody that's older, they may not be as adept at the technology. They certainly probably don't have a cell phone gimbal that they're comfortable with and know how to use. They may not be using Slack. So these new tools and knowing how to operate them well is something you might have to walk them through in advance as part of your audit preparation. You're going to have bandwidth limitations. We've all seen as part of COVID-19 that because the whole world is using Zoom now, Zoom is slower. Because the whole world is using the internet is slower. That's just a fact. There's no way around it. And you're going to always have bandwidth limitations. But think about your company. It's slow now with everybody on a network. Now let's increase everybody's not only on the network, but they're going in through a VPN from home and they're trying to do a remote audit and you have 5 people at once using video on Zoom. That could really slow you down. And last but not least, not everybody has an unlimited budget for software and hardware. Some companies have budget limitations, so they can't just go run out and get an account and get the hardware and get the selfie stick and the smartphone gimbal. So sometimes you have to make do with the old-fashioned selfie stick, which is called an arm. Your hands and arms work just fine, which is why I say sometimes just having a camera person is all you need. Somebody can just sit there patiently and hold their arm steady, and they don't need the fancy cell phone gimbal and they don't need the fancy selfie stick. The person that's tall with a long arm will work just fine in a pinch. Come on to the inside. Okay, there we go. So facility layout and flow of materials and personnel. So one of the things that is a particular concern for people, at least what I've seen on blog posts about remote auditing, everybody's worried, how in the world am I ever going to do an audit of manufacturing when I'm remote? It's like you can't do it. They couldn't possibly do something for manufacturing. And I don't think that's true at all. I think there's no issue whatsoever with doing an audit of manufacturing remotely. That's what the cameraman is for. The camera person, whether it's a woman or a man, they can hold that camera and they can zoom into things. When I can't read something, sometimes I snap a picture of it with my phone and then zoom it in on my phone so I can see it better. So you might actually be able to see things better with a remote audit than you can in person. You can also get to places that might not be safe for you to go in the real world. In the virtual world, you can get to unsafe places. You can use drones. You can use virtual tours. You can use photos of the facility when it isn't running. If a company doesn't have a really cool layout map of their whole facility, they might have a pest control map. Most facilities that are medical device facilities have a pest control plan, have an environmental monitoring plan. They have maps of their facility, and so they can use those maps and show you how the flow of material goes around the facility. So they can provide that to you as an email. You can share it on the screen, and you can both write on that screen simultaneously. Like I have an annotation feature. I don't know if anybody's ever used it on Zoom before, but we will come up with a really cool color here and maybe a thicker font. So we'll do this. So I can write, and then Matthew could come along and he could use a different one simultaneously. I could let him get involved here, and maybe Matt would use blue. So I use red and he uses blue, and we could say, you know, materials goes this way and this goes that way. We can say what the flow of materials is for that audit, and we can make it very clear to somebody on a pest control map or a diagram of the production lines or a environmental monitoring diagram where we show the sampling points. We can show the flow of materials, and that might really help somebody that's never been to that facility understand what they need to understand without actually being there. But they should also be given process flow diagrams so they understand that as well. If anybody's done a lean manufacturing project, 5S project, you might have done a Kaizen, you might have a spaghetti diagram that you created that shows lots of flows of material and people crossing one another. And that's why they call it a spaghetti diagram, because it gets all tangled up. That's another tool that might be helpful to see something somebody's already done to help you. But you could also take your drone and get people a nice big color picture of the whole entire facility, or do it in segments. So think about that as well. Using drones for pictures of the facility as well might be really helpful to get a great facility layout for people when they're doing remote audit of the production area. Next thing on the list here. So I'll give you a little example here. So you might say, as an auditor, could you draw for me the flow of records from the record control area to the lead auditor or FDA inspector? So I'll pull out my little animation tool again, or annotation tool again. And so let's say my document control center is over here, or record control center is here. And I have a runner in here, and they're going to leave this when they get the request for a record from the scribe that's typing into Instant Messenger. And they're going to go out here and they're going to grab that document, and then they're going to come back here and they're going to make a few copies of it, and they're going to stamp them uncontrolled copies. And then they're going to come back in here, go in the room, and they're going to give them to the scribe so the scribe can log them in that they've been received. And one goes to the management rep, and another one goes to the subject matter expert, and a third one goes to the FDA. And then our friendly runner goes back to this place here. And maybe we have a little tray on the table here for documents that we're finished reviewing. We put them in the outbox so we can keep track of all the documents we reviewed and make a list of those later to prepare for the next audit, and also to provide a permanent record of what was requested by the FDA. So this is just a flow of a very simple process, but it doesn't have to work this way. This is the way we've always done it when we've had paper records and we've been able to walk around the facility and we've all been able to work on site. But if we're working remotely, the FDA might be somewhere else, and we might all be in this room with a projector. So we might have the printer or copier be out here instead, next to the document control room. And so the runner is out here, never has to leave. The runner might pull the document that they got requested in Slack, put it on top of the copier, scan it in, and if it's a really modern printer like I have, You just hit send by email, and it sends it to the scribe, who's also in this room now. And the scribe puts it up on the projector for everybody to see, and that's automatically shared with the FDA. So the FDA sees it real time, the subject matter expert sees it real time, the manager rep sees it real time, and it's never left the document room. The person took the record out, put it on the scanner, scanned it, and put it back away. They never made a hard copy. They never used the printer as a printer. They used the printer as a scanning device to scan it electronically. And then we save those records as well as an electronic record. So that's a really great way to save the environment, because we save on all that paper. We didn't make a copy for the subject matter expert, the management rep, and the FDA. We didn't have to kill trees with a copier, and we didn't have to run back and forth like a crazy person. Um, and we can even record the entire thing. So we can even record step by step, so we can go back and watch real time. How did this all occur, and what can we do better next time when we deal with the FDA? And you could give a copy of the video to the FDA so they don't have to take notes as accurately. I'm not sure many people are going to volunteer for that, but it is an option. If you're doing an internal audit, you'd be crazy not to do that. If you're, because you want to simulate what a real audit or a real FDA inspection is like, so you can improve your technique for handling real FDA inspections and real notified body audits during an internal audit. So you want to record those, and you want to look back at those and learn from those. So record it when it's an internal audit. That's just my advice. But if you've got a brand new auditee that you're training to be a lead auditor, you can shadow people, but you can't shadow every single thing they do. Well, if you record it, you can. So that's another opportunity for people to go back and watch what happened, the sequence, and reflect on it and learn from it, and not kill a bunch of trees and not walk all over the place like a crazy person. So it could actually be more effective. And if you were explaining a production process to somebody, you could explain it with these line diagrams like this, and somebody could explain it virtually to the person by showing them a little sketch like this that I did in PowerPoint, and then walking them around. So somebody that knows how to use this annotation and has a diagram could really help the auditor a lot. And then you could snap a picture of this without any trouble by hitting save up here and show in folder. So, oh, I forgot to erase. So clear all drawings. So next screen here, remote audit considerations. So we're getting towards the end here. When you're doing an audit, one of the things you got to think about is oral communication. What things are we going to do when we communicate with somebody? We're collecting audit objective evidence. The information that we hear from another person is objective evidence. We talk to the subject matter expert, we ask questions, we ask open-ended questions, they give us verbal responses back. That's auditing. When you do a desktop audit and you just review a procedure or a record and you don't speak with the subject matter expert or the person doing the job, that's a desktop audit. It's not really a process audit. It's not a true audit. It's just reviewing documentation. So that's great for a new quality system where you're verifying that they have all the procedures. It's what we used to do before there were stage one audits, but now a stage one audit is more than just doing a desktop audit. Now you have to actually interview the people and make sure they're ready and they understand and they've been trained. That's part of that oral communication need to make it a true audit. So you have to have verbal communication in order for this to be an audit. It's not just email me a file and I'll read it. The document types, think about this. Is it going to be procedures? Is it going to be records? Is it going to be electronic only, or is it going to be paper-based? A lot of even software companies have paper-based records. So they need to think about, where are those records located, and do I have a scanner right nearby, or can I just hold my cell phone over it and snap a picture and text it to the person? That works too in the case of an audit. It's just as good, if not better, because I can zoom in on my cell phone, which I can't really do unless I put on my glasses and get really close to it in an on-site audit. Think about different types of record types. Like if you're going into a microbiology lab and you're looking for sterility, that might be something you're actually checking. Well, people can snap a picture of that and show you the color changes and show you, example, what a positive control is and what a negative control is, and explain that to you. And so those might be some of the records you're collecting. Think about what equipment and materials you're going to need to do your remote audit. You're going to need a camera. You're going to need Zoom. You're going to need a webcam. You might need a selfie stick. You might need a scanner. These are all the things that you're going to need to conduct this audit. Now we get to the fun part, the Q&A. So these were all the slides that I was going to present, and then when people went in and registered, I had a text box for them to type in their most important question. And some people have figured out they can game the system by just hitting return or leaving a space, and they don't have to leave a question. But if you leave a question, then you get an answer. So it really will help you in terms of figuring out um, what were, you know, what questions you have. I will try to answer those, and it'll help you improve your auditing technique if you ask questions. So the first one here was the person actually put down effective remote audits. They didn't phrase it as a question. So I was assuming that their question is, how do you ensure effective remote audits? So number one, whether you're conducting a remote audit or you're conducting an on-site audit, how do you verify conformity? So you typically ask for records, prove it in writing. If it's not documented, it's a rumor. So you verify for conformity. That's no different. You're going to ask the person for records. They can show it to you, zoom in with their cell phone, snap a picture, or not snap a picture, just hold it steady. Put it up on a music stand, hold it steady, and I'll write down the information into my audit report in my Pixel book. So that's one way. Number two, can you access the objective evidence remotely? So this is paper-based records. Just because they're paper doesn't mean I can't see them if we're using webcams. But if we're not using a webcam, or I want to have more time with it and review it offline, that's fine. Just send it to me electronically. Scan it, pop it in a scanner, and send it to me. And how reliant is your audit team on walking around? This is something you got to think about. Some auditors, particularly people that have been auditing as a career for a very long time, um, have voiced that they are much more comfortable. They rely very heavily on the ability to turn their head and see what's going on around them. With a new auditor, we're always struggling to teach them to do that, but it actually works as a deficiency or a hindrance to an experienced auditor when they switch from on-site to off-site doing remote audits, because now in the virtual world, they have to tell the person to turn the camera so they can see things around them. And they're not used to communicating to somebody. They're used to keeping that to themselves. They're used to keeping it kind of close to the vest, that they're looking for other things around them that the auditee might not volunteer up. And as soon as you sort of have to tell the camera person to please pan over there, now they all know you're looking somewhere else other than where they're trying to direct you. And auditors like to keep that close to their vest. Some of them want to surprise people or not be led by the auditee. So the more dependent your team is on that ability, the more difficulty they're going to have adjusting to now they have to tell somebody to pan the cell phone over another direction. What are the key considerations for leading a remote audit team or a virtual audit team? So this was one of the questions that was asked. I think one of the probably the key consideration for um, leading a remote audit team is the same thing as any audit. You want a very experienced auditor doing this, somebody that can adapt to almost any situation. Now that we've added technology and we've added distance and we've reduced our senses, we've increased the likelihood that things are going to get lost in communication and there are going to be hiccups in the process. So you need somebody that's extremely adept at managing not only the audit itself, but also the team. And so a very skilled lead auditor is really important. So therefore, if your company is going to rely on remote audits or virtual audits, I would highly recommend that you maybe have a little bit more time involved in training a lead auditor, more observed audits, more feedback that's very candid on this is what you did well, this is what you did poorly, this is what you need to improve. Do that for a longer period of time. Observe more audits, observe more situations for each person you're training to be a lead auditor before you let them off on their own. That's really, really important. I think another thing that I would also do if I were going to do a lot of remote auditing as a company is I would train more people to be team members, not to be lead auditors, but to be team members so I could use more subject matter experts. Most companies have the QA people doing the bulk of the auditing, and they're all lead auditors. I think if I were going to do a lot of remote auditing, I would rely much more on team members that are not lead auditors, and I would have a very skilled lead auditor that's managing the group, maybe not actually doing any auditing for the most of the audit. They spend most of their time just managing subject matter experts that are an expert in that subject area, and they just facilitate the entire process. So I think I would end up with somebody that's more of a manager as a team leader and less of an auditee. So they're teaching team members how to ask open-ended questions and how to collect evidence, and relying on them to know the subject very, very well, because they're cherry picking somebody that is the best in our company on, let's say, incoming inspection, or the best in the company on how to how to build a printed circuit board, or how to do some sort of sterility test, whatever it is. So that's the next question. Next slide. Can employees be fully remote? Absolutely no one on site. Yes, anything is possible. You could run everything with drones, I suppose. Um, you can do all your auditing if you're doing a partial quality system audit. So you're not doing a full quality system audit. Yes, you can do it all remotely. If you have a virtual product, such as software as a medical device, that can be done fully remotely. If you have a production process, somebody's going to have to be at the facility on site. A subject matter expert or a camera person or somebody will have to be there, and they're going to have to be physically building product, but you don't have to be. The notified bodies and the certification bodies are not comfortable yet with doing production processes remotely. They want to be on site. And I think some of this is just that's the way they've always done it, and they're not comfortable doing this yet. So it's changed for them. But the other part of it is you got to remember that they've just been had beaten into their head for the last decade straight. So since 2010, we have been barraged year after year after year the importance of doing unannounced audits and looking for fraud because of the PIP scandal in Europe. So that's been beat into their heads, and they just don't trust anybody to be doing a production audit off-site entirely. So they want to do the production audits on site, and so they can do partial audits of the quality system. And so when you have surveillance audits, you can skip certain areas and leave that for the next year. They're saying we can look at certain areas, but production we can't look at remotely. But that's not true if you're doing a supplier audit or you're doing an internal audit. There's nothing preventing you from doing those remotely. So yes, you can do, employees can be doing everything remotely, but you're not going to find your notified bodies are going to be willing to do that for production. So that is going to be a limitation, at least until they change their tune and people become more comfortable with remote auditing. And they have to accept some trust of, you know, give me control of the camera person and tell them where to point so I can see what I want to see. Next question was asked was, what is the best classification between non-conforming um, reports versus OFIs? So this is not exactly a remote auditing question, but it's definitely an auditing question. So what is the best way to classify between, is this a non-conforming material report or is this an opportunity for improvement? So I think what's important to understand here for those of you that don't is that as part of the MDSAP program, the Medical Device Single Audit Program, the auditors were told you may no longer give out OFIs, period, because that is consulting and the FDA won't allow you to do it. So because of the FDA, we can no longer call them OFIs. Are auditors still giving out OFIs? Sure they are. Are they giving them verbally? Yes, they are. They're not putting them in writing, or they're being somewhat more clever and they're saying this is an observation. I wasn't able to gather enough evidence to show whether this was conforming or non-conforming, so I wrote it up as an observation, but it's not a non-conforming observation like a 483. It's just an observation that somebody needs to gather more records, maybe as a follow-up in a later audit or internally as a follow-up. But I wasn't able to determine whether it's a nonconformity or not. In general, I think it makes sense to just keep things as black and white as you possibly can. In general, I've never really felt I did somebody a real service by giving them an OFI instead of a nonconformity. I think I've actually done a disservice to them by not giving them a nonconformity, because then they didn't open up a CAPA in most cases, and they didn't prevent it from reoccurring. They instead just corrected the problem and allowed it to happen again and again and again. So in general, I think people are better off getting the nonconformity. So when in doubt, grade it as a nonconformity. But we also have um, a numbered system for MDSAP audits. I'm not in favor of that. I think people have enough trouble distinguishing whether something is a major and a minor. I don't think we need to give them a 6-point scale to worry about. But I think it was really important to define what is a nonconformity, what is a minor, and what is a major, and what is an OFI. So the way I did it was I said, in order to be a major, it has to be a complete absence of a system requirement. That's one. Number two, it has to be a repeat nonconformity that I'm escalating. Or three, you're knowingly shipping product that is nonconforming. So one of those three is a major. If it doesn't meet those three criteria, any one of them, then it's not a major. So by default, it's a minor, which means everything else is a minor. And so most of your findings should be minors. I do think notified body auditors have been escalating things to majors a little bit more aggressively than they did in the past. Some of that's because they're being told to by competent authorities, but it also has this added benefit of they make more money and they come back in 90 days to close it down. So it's hard to tell how much of that is the competent authorities and how much of it is management saying, write more nonconformities, particularly majors. So I hope I answered this question, but if somebody still is on the line and you were the person that asked this, or somebody else wants to ask a clarifying question, don't hesitate to put it in the chat or unmute your mic and ask. Next one, what kind of software tools do you recommend? So I've listed a few basic ones like Google Docs and Slack. We use GoToMeeting in the past. We now use Zoom. Joe Hage uses GoToMeeting all the time. I don't really see any difference in the functionality between the two, excuse me, between those two. So I think they're kind of equal in performance. I think Google Meetings is really coming along, and it's hard to say that there's a lot of that they're much behind it. I think Google Meetings, with some of the bridge software or add-on plugins that they've added, I think Google Meeting is comparable to that, and a lot of people are using it. I think Microsoft Teams is another one that is worth looking at. Um, I'm not a fan of Skype, but Skype's also a player, and a lot of European companies I find are very comfortable with that and use it a lot. So those are all options. But I mean, today I had a Microsoft Teams call with a client in Italy, and I thought the quality of the call was very, very poor. And I thought the functionality was poor, and I thought the bandwidth was poor. So I've talked with other people on Zoom meetings and had a much better luck in Zoom. So I think they're still not up to Zoom, even though Zoom has way too many people using it right now. And if you're a 10-year-old can use it, probably it's good enough. So that's my favorite software tool, and that's what we're using to record the session. So Zoom's our favorite, but it's not the only tool out there. There are a lot of tools out there that are equally comparable. Like I said, GoToMeeting, I can barely tell the difference between the two platforms. I would highly encourage people to think out of the box and use other things. If you're writing an audit report and you're not recording, you could use Snapchat. Yes, no problem. You could use FaceTime. Probably wouldn't, but yes, you could do those things. You could use Periscope and Instagram. There are a lot of other tools that you could use out there. So you could also record something. So record a video and then send it to somebody, upload it to Dropbox. So there's lots of tools you can use, but I think my favorite tools are going to be more and more the Google Suite, because we're sharing the audit report and we can simultaneously edit things at the same time. So I see more and more I'm going to be using more of the Google Suite of products. and less of things that I pay money for. So that's another factor, is paying for it. But I think Slack is my sort of killer app that I really, really like, and it integrates really nice. If you add Zapier, um, you can do a lot of things with Google Docs and Google Apps and Slack at the same time. Like Zoom meetings, I just go / and the word Zoom, and it creates a Zoom meeting for me right away with somebody. So that is the fastest, easiest way to start a Zoom meeting. Okay, so now we're through the Q&A. Like I said, anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to put it in the chat box or unmute your mic. These are the blogs that we've written so far. We still got 6 more blogs to write that are related on remote auditing. So we're doing a lot of work on this in preparation for the launch of our book. We're also, this is the second webinar that we've done on remote auditing. We have 3 more. The next one is going to be supplier webinars. It's going to be how to qualify your suppliers, but it's going to be talking a lot about how to evaluate those suppliers and when to use remote audits and when to use on-site audits with those suppliers, and what questions to ask those suppliers to make sure they can support a remote audit. So we're actually going to be providing a questionnaire to help companies that want to qualify a supplier. Make sure you ask them some questions about their ability to support remote audit as well, because that can play into your decision when you get a supplier in Taiwan or something. Next on the list is the remote auditing techniques webinar. So we're going to talk about our new work instruction for conducting remote audits. So that's in the works and will be presented then. So we're going to go step by step. This is what you should do to prepare for a remote audit and prepare your auditee. And then the last one in August, we're going to share some interviews. I've already done one interview with Greg Jones at SGS, and I'm going to be trying to talk to all 12 of the notified bodies that we've identified on that webpage. They're all MDSAP auditors. They're all notified body auditors, and I even identify which ones have been designated under the MDR. So Intertek was just designated recently under the MDR, and I also identify on that page which ones are IVD, which is even a shorter list. So you got 12 on the list, and then 6 I think that are IVD candidates as well. There are 2 other resources here I've identified. One is the ISO 19011-2018 guidance document that talks about auditing management systems. In Annex A, it has a table explaining what's different between an on-site audit versus a remote or virtual audit. And then there's a brand new guideline that was put out by ASQ. It's the ISO 9001 Auditing Practices Group Guidance on Remote Audits. It's only about 13 pages long, but it's dedicated to remote audits. So I think that's pretty powerful. And then, of course, Matthew and I are in the middle of writing our book. So it's available for pre-order. If you click on that Amazon link, it's $4.99. And it will go up after August 28th. Once it goes live, it'll go up by $5. But it's still inexpensive. And there will be a paperback version available as well. But until we get it written, we can't make the pre-order available because we don't know how many pages to make it. So we don't know how big of a cover to have. So right now, all you've got is a front cover for the Kindle, and we don't have the back cover and spine for the paperback, but there will be one, and it will probably be $5 more. So $9.99 for the pre-order, and then going up to $14.99. The important stuff, if you have questions, Skype, email, phone, and the Calendly link to schedule meetings with me anytime. And if you're located in a different country, just shoot me an email and let me know what time. I usually accommodate a lot of European and Middle East audits, Western Asian audits in the early morning, 6, 7 o'clock. And then a lot of Southeast Asia I support in the evenings, 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And yes, I have worked at midnight before, and 2 and 3, and had to work around the clock. So yep, just let me know when we need to support you, and we will work something out that's convenient. You don't have to stick to the 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Calendly schedule that we have there if you're in another country. I'll accommodate you. So that's the end of my my audit slides for today. And I don't see any more questions in the chat box. And we are just about out of time. So I'm going to stop the recording. And thank you very much, everybody, for your time. And I hope to have you in our next session. Just to remind you, our next session is on how to qualify your suppliers. Don't forget to ask me for a certificate if you took this webinar as well. Everybody that signed up for it should also get a certificate. And if you didn't, please remind me and we'll send off a certificate so you get your continuing education credits. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.